Greetings folk, David Johnson here again. Good, today we do the semi-desert tutorials. We start, this is number 1, and nice picture, nice easy one, and I think you're going to enjoy it, and I'm very chuffed with the final outcome of my one, so I hope you're going to enjoy it. But before we start, if you just look at our picture here, there's a couple of odds and sods that I'm not too happy with, and so I'll just deal with those first and then we'll get into our picture itself. So the first thing that bothers me is, you can see where that white arrow is, there's a rock that is behind the tree, and it kind of interferes with the visual aspect of the tree, so I want us to not to include that. Becomes a bit confusing to the eye. The next one is, you see where those black arrows are, those rocks that are there, shattered and broken up, and that there, we're going to kind of just simplify it. It's going to give us a whole lot of extra work, and it's not necessary, so we're going to just, we'll have some bits of shadow in there, but nothing like that's in the picture. The next is a grove of acacias that are in the background there. It looks almost like a plantation type situation, same old. So where that circle is, that one with the red, I'm going to add in a nice big rock there, and in that way we're going to change it. Then there's bush in the foreground, a little bit too dominant, so also I'm going to just put a rock there in front of it. I don't know what bush it is, it's one of these desert type plants, but it just dominates the foreground there, and that's, to me, is a no-no. And now you can see with the rocks there, everything just looks a little bit better and a bit more simple. So if we look at the rocks and the sand foreground, you can see it's quite a different sort of color. The sand in the foreground, it's got a little bit of red in it, a little bit of reddy pinky color, whereas the rocks are more on the orangey yellow side, and I like that. It contrasts, and you don't get the one sort of blending into the other one. The other thing we need to watch very, very, very carefully is when you come to do your tree that's a shepherd tree, be very, very careful that you don't go out of your picture. You use a pencil and you will draw it and make sure that everything is contained therein. Otherwise it just doesn't, you're going to lose the whole effect of the picture. These little shepherd trees, they're quite a nice little addition to the bushveld. It's called shepherds because it's a forage tree. The animals can actually feed off the leaves and that there, and the tree itself gives a lot of shade. A very dense tree can sometimes be a difference of 20 degrees centigrade under the tree as opposed to the temperatures in the sun. So nicer, that's why it's called a shepherd's tree. It's a shepherd's friend. But they exist very commonly in the drier areas, but you get them all over, right down from the north and down into Natal and across into the desert areas. It's a very hardy tree. So here we kick off with our painting, and we want to use a very light coloured sky. I don't want anything dark. This is desert area, so you want to sort of create that atmosphere of heat and light and brightness in it there. So I've elected to do a nice sort of simple sky, and that I normally do. Combination of burnt umber in the base, ultramarine number 9 on top, and then finish off with the ultramarine number 8 at the going over the top and going back down again. Then we move down to that far plain that you can see beyond, below the mountains, that we're going to use a bit of deep yellow there for, deep yellow. Then what I wanted to just to look at is just at the base of the mountains, just put in a little bit of burnt umber over the top of that, just to give it just that fraction more distance there. All right, so we're going to move into the mountains, and we're going to use a blue-grey 0.8 just to kick off with, blue-grey 0.8, and hold your pastel vertical. Press hard down on the top so that you get a nice straight line at the top, and it's nice sharp. Okay, so then we move into the plane itself, and if you look very carefully, there's a lot of little bushes, and there's, where I'm busy now, there's actually looks like a little bit of a riverbed, so it's a bit solid over there. So what you will need to do is just to hold your pastel sort of about 30 degrees, and then just using the texture of the paper, skim it over, and just here and there, just do a little dot, so that you just got this variety of colour, the sort of the kaleidoscope of application there. So it's a suggestion that's there, nothing more. And but it's important to keep those little dots in that they're small, because that helps with your distance and your perspective of what you're trying to achieve in terms of this plane that's just stretching way out beyond that last outcrop of rock there. Okay, so that's how you create that distance. Then as we come forward, we'll move across into a bluish-grey number 7. So just a tad darker, but it'll sort of overlap, and it will creep up into the foreground there. So it's just your colour perspective that you do. Okay. Yeah, there we are busy at the moment. There's sort of like a little bit of a outcropping there. We'll come back later there and just put a little bit of light oxide red in there just to give it a bit of distinction, but we'll do that right towards the end. Okay, right. So you can just see there the color change and the way that one just makes that transition as one comes slowly forward. All right. Now I'm using a bit of a deep yellow there, number 8, just to break up the grey, so you just got more like sort of streaks rather than just a whole blur that's there. Oh, so here we've got just an overview in the still, so you can just start to get a grasp of where we're going with this picture. Okay, so to achieve the effect that I've done with this deep yellow, I hold the pastel almost 45 degrees. So it's more of a thin line that you're applying rather than a broadish one there. It's just that distance effect that you get. All right, so I'm going to move into the foreground now. And in the beginning I mentioned that the sand has got that sort of reddy tinge to it. So we're going to use a combination of light oxide red, a little bit of burnt umber number 9, and a bit of light oxide red number 7, and also we're going to use a bit of raw sienna number 5. Okay, remember those are the colours that we're going to do, and it's just more or less a mixing of the colours together, just till we can get that tone. I couldn't quite just get the exact tone using the light oxide red 7, so I found I needed to just add those a little bit more in there. So there we go. You'll also see I used that gold ochre 3 then for those little outcroppings of rock there, sort of just in between, and just to get us a bit of perspective in that thing. All right, so here I'm putting in that burnt umber number 5, and you can just see, so we start to get that sort of more of a reddish tint. So the burnt, so not burnt umber, burnt sienna. That burnt sienna's got that sort of a bit of a reddy tinge in it. Eh? All right, so just work it through. You can see I've worked around where the rocks to be, so that we don't get the colours mixing up. Right, it's just a matter of working it, just gently, just work it up, just build it up. Don't go and bang in the colours too dark, and then you're going to find that you're going to struggle then to apply your pastel, and it's going to fill up the tooth, saturate the tooth, and then you're going to have a problem there. Good, so back to the gold ochre number 3 with those little rock outcroppings there, and I'm starting to shape them now as per photo. They were far too low, so I'm just building them up, pushing them across. and not worry too much about sort of super detail. All right, so the rocks it did is exactly the same process we did with those far mountains. Hold the pastel a little bit harder at the top. We're holding it vertical, so you get that nice sharp edge that can contrast with the that plane behind there. Okay, so now I'm using a light oxide red number 3, just to get in a little bit of detail in those outcroppings. And just very rough at this stage. I'll come back later and just do a little bit of extra touch up, but not worried at this stage. So we're going to move into the rocks now. You can use a bit of light orange number 3, and once again hold the pastel vertical and more pressure at the top so you get a nice sharp edge. So you've got to apply a bit of pressure just to get those sharp edges, eh? So just doing all the underpainting for all those rocks. And there, where I'm here now, that's where that big rock's going to come in there, just to replace this other there. And just run it all the way through. So I'm not too tied up with getting exactly the rocks as they were. It's just a suggestion of how it is. And we're not doing a portrait of the rocks. It's just merely a bit of artistic license that you apply and just do what is necessary to make the painting work. So here we are putting a bit of deep yellow number 8 on top of those rocks. So that's part of the recipe for rocks. Just colour the rock, then the highlight, then the shadow. All right, so that's basically what we've done there. So initially for the shadow areas, I'm going to use a bit of blues grey number 3, just to, it's a complementary opposite to the orange, just to help me with that shape that we got there. But we're going to come back and darken up those shadows as well with the light oxide red. Okay, so just an initial shape, but not the final shape. Good, so you can start to see the rocks are starting to take a little bit of shape. But it'll take a bit more modelling and playing around with it just to get to eventually where you're happy with what you have there. All right. The original photograph shows the rock nice, quite and round, kind of like that, but it'll probably just add a bit more cracks and stuff towards the end of the picture. There we are, we're just getting all those shadows in there. And all right, so now we've actually moved across to a light oxide red. So I've chosen that because of that sort of ready tinge that they have there, and it's a little bit softer than the burnt umbers and stuff like that. So I've elected to rather use the light oxide red for the shadow areas. All right, now this is a kind of a tricky area. You'll notice that the foreground, or the sand around the rocks, there's a lot of little pebbles and stuff that they have there. And the only way I've sort of managed to sort of figure it out or do that type of thing, I hold my pastel vertical and I lightly just skim the pastel over the sand area. Okay, so those are going to be my basic pebbles and stuff, and then we'll come back afterwards and do some more detail. Okay, so here we are, just putting some more of that deep yellow in, just to give me some more of that shape that we need. Okay, so the technique I use is I hold the pastel flat on its side, and then I skim it over the rock, and it sort of then gives me sort of a textured look. So we still want to see a little bit of that orange underneath it, so just be careful that you don't use too much pressure. All right, so we're moving into that, those acacias in the background there, and I am using a blue-grey number 3 initially. All right, so you might look at it and you say, oh, but that's too cold and that's too light. No, what I'm wanting to do there is just to give an underpainting of coldness there, and we'll come back with a little bit more warmer colours on top of that, and you'll see the whole thing will just give me distance between what's behind, what's the trees there and what's in the foreground. Alright, so we're busy with that little bush there, and I'm using a grey number 3. Okay, it's not black, it's just off that. And I'm holding the pastel flat on its side, and I work it up against the rock and push it away. So you can see I'm actually redrawing the silhouette of the rock with the colour that I'm using now. Alright, so try and follow it sort of closely enough there, and I'm using the pastel flat on its side, using a lot of texture on the paper. And then now and again, when I'm needing a little bit of extra sort of finer detail, I'll turn my pastel on its side, like I've just done there now, and that'll give you just a little bit of extra sharpness there. So so this is close up, so we're doing detail and sharpness, right? Getting some shadow in, all right? So this is just underpainting at this stage, and we'll come in with a bit of green-grey just now. So we're putting in the highlights in that little bush, and we're using a green-grey to do that, and we're going to use the in a 45-degree fashion, using the point of the pastel so that I can get some fine detail. And remember not to over-highlight, so leave behind some of those darks that are there. All right, so you'll notice that this colour of this bush is very much a sort of a bluish tinge to it. And that the green-grey helps to give you that look. Okay, so we'll come back later on just to do a little bit of final highlights on it. But as I say, please don't over-highlight. Just leave those. Can you see I'm leaving those little bits of dark behind? And I want you to also to start to see how that the color perspective is working. If you'll see the colors warm, dark in the foreground, and as you go away, you start to go colder and fainter, right? So even in the underpainting, I've already established that color perspective in the painting. All right, so just be establishing a bit of the sand again, using those 3 colors that we showed there, and it's just a mixture of them, a bit of this, bit of that. All right, so here we got an orange, light orange number 3. It's just going back and just sort of re-establishing the shape of the rock, and just make sure your shadows aren't showing up something else that, or some sort of shape, or a chicken or whatever the case may be. All right, so back to my light oxide red, number 0.3, and now I'm doing the bigger rocks. Okay, so the more noticeable one. So we do the shadow first, and then we put the highlight on top of it. Okay. And it's just those colors that we showed before, light oxide red 0.3, then a bit of orange light 0.9, a bit of burnt umber 0.10, and a bit of white as well. Okay, so there we just work it in, and we're also using a deep yellow as well. All right, so, and then when you come to do the highlight part, you just press very hard, so that it becomes really noticeable. A little bit boring, this part of it, just to do those rocks, but you'll see at the end of the day I do far less than what's actually in the photograph. The reason being that I've just tried to keep down the busyness. Okay, just giving another view of what it looks like. So we move back to those far trees that are there, and we're going to use a bit of grey 0.3 and just work that in on top of that blue-grey, but you're not going to press as hard as the foreground. So we want that distinction in the tonal value of the colour that we're using now. So that just gives you that bit of distance that's there. Okay. See how I put my pastel flat on the side and flick it up, so I maintain the nice sharpness of the rock that's there. And I'm working with my pastel flat on its side. All right, so using a rubbing stick, just to get a bit of solidness in the silhouette of those trees. It just helps, otherwise you get too many little speckles coming through. Right. So we start moving in with a bit of green and a bit of cinnabar green light 0.7, and I work that in on top of the shadow colors, but make sure I leave behind a lot of the shadows so that don't over highlight. Working my pastel flat on its side and just work it where the sun's coming from the left, so the left side of the trees have the predominance of highlight on them, and conversely the right side will have more shadow. And also just try and confine the silhouette. Don't start growing and growing and getting those trees going bigger and bigger. Try and keep them within what we've got there. Alright, so now working in behind those bushes there, those trees, going back there, see there's a lot of little bushes and stuff. So I'm using a bluish grey 0.3 just as an underpainting. And just little round little balls, they're small little bushes distance away. So we use the blue-grey to help us get an underpainting of coldness that helps to push the bushes back. As soon as you start making them very dark, then they come forward. So we don't want that. And then I use a bit of cinnabar green on top of it as well, and it all just comes together at the end. So a bit of blue-grey 0.3 and then a bit of cinnabar green on top of it. Back to our orange 0.3. Okay, she's got a little bush here that's a bit closer. So grey 0.3, press nice and hard, so you can see there's a distinction between where we're working now and what's happening at the back there. Okay, so we start working in our shadows in those rocks, and we're using a light oxide red 0.3. Good, here we go with the tree. So what I did was I used a pastel pencil, burnt umber. I sketched out the tree, then took a rubber and rubbed out the tree stump and the base where the mountain is there, and I didn't bother about the top there because there's going to be little bits and pieces of sky that are going to be shining through, so you don't want that too bare underneath there. Okay, so here we start. So I'm starting with a burnt umber number 10, so that's going to give me the nice sort of whitish light grey tree trunk. You can finish off with a bit of white at the end there, but at this stage we're just going to use the burnt umber, and then I'm using a bluish grey 0.3, and you can also use a grey violet blue as well, 0.3. Right, so we move up into the foliage area. I'm using a burnt umber number 3, and this is where you've got to be very careful, folk, very, very careful. Just make sure that you contain that canopy of the tree and don't go up out of the painting. Okay, it's very, very, very important, this little aspect here. Working my pastel flat on its side, and then just letting the pastel work the texture, and you can see there now just how it looks. Left a little bit of sky to come through, and we'll put some branches silhouetting against that sky, but that's more or less what we want. And then you've got that shadow of the tree trunk right under the canopy of the tree, and then a little bit on the left as well. Right, so I'm wanting to work on top of the foliage now, and but I've got too much pastel on, so I need to give it a bit of a spray with a fixative. I use hairspray. You can use whatever you like to use, and then we then come back now, and then we're able to work on top of that without there being too much trouble. Yeah, so I apply even less of the burnt umber than of the grey green. So this is just highlights that you're going to have there. So but I've still got those deep shadows that you can still see there. Okay, I'm going back into my rocks now, and I'm starting to create a lot more cracks and little crevices, and it just gives it a little bit more character, but at the same time I've sort of maintained that roundness that I feel is necessary. Okay, all right, so using a deep yellow now to establish the highlights, and we're sort of coming to the final sort of application of the rocks. So some places I'll actually work it on top of the shadow just to soften it down. Other places I'll leave it as is. This is always one of my favorite parts in painting, is playing around with these rocks and whatever shape that you want it. Alright, so it's always good to have a couple of dead branches lying underneath a tree. There we've got one. I just use a bit of burnt umber initially and then a bit of white on top of it. And I'm using that white just to re-establish a little bit of the highlight on that tree. Okay, and there what it looks like now. And we sort of done the tree trunk. Moving into the foliage now, and we're using a Cinnabar Green 0.7. And now that I've sprayed it, you can see how the Cinnabar Green stays separate from the burnt umber. It doesn't blend and mix in. All right, so remember your light's coming from the left, so the left sides of the branches and the leaves and the clusters will have the highlight. The other side will have the shadow. Yeah, you can see my tree now coming. I've got a nice 3D effect. So it's just all about illusions, light and shadow, and that's what helps you to give you that 3D effect. Using burnt umber. Just remember I said we're going to put some branches that are silhouetting against that blue sky, and just those little bit of extras there just always helps to just create that bit of a realism. So going back to those background trees, just re-establishing the shadow there, and so that, because I lost a little bit of the shadow in the highlight, so I even make that mistake. Okay, so you can see that tree that's behind that main tree. I'm just push that one out a little bit, and just to make sure that it's completely separate in the illusion that you look through, so that the tree's standing out against that background one. Right, back to my stones, and it's a combination of those four colors, and I just mix them up and put a little bit here, a little bit there. And in that way, you just get that variety that's coming. It's not so you avoid the same old, same old. Yeah, and when like I said before, when you're applying the highlight, press nice and hard. Okay, and you don't have to fill them up like it is in the photograph. You can see that what I've got there is quite sufficient. All right, doing some little branches that are catching the highlights, and there we've got a bit of burnt umber number 10, so that's where the branch is sort of sticking out and where the sunlight is catching it. Alright, green grey there for the far distant bushes there, just also helps with the distance. Right, pastel pencil signature. So using a bit of orange light number 9 just to touch up some of those rocks at the back there, and picture's sort of coming towards an end, and pretty chuffed to the way it's actually turned out. Just to sort of fine little touches here and there. Rightio, here's the final painting. Good, I did a couple of just little changes offline. The first one was up on the right hand side of that far distant plain there where it meets the mountains. It was dropping off a little bit, so on the right hand side there, so I just leveled that off. And then on the background acacias, the main tree itself, and the other little bushes, I used a bit of deep yellow 0.5, so you can actually see now the foreground bush that's there, very distinctive from all the other foliage behind there, and that's what I hope to achieve. I'm happy with the color of the sand in the foreground, the little rocks, and then the contrasting orangey rocks as well, that sort of just helps to actually contrast the whole thing. So the whole painting contrasts very nicely for me, and that's something that you need to aim for in your art. And everything has just worked together, but I did need to do a little bit of changes, added in the rocks and took out a couple of little things to get the whole picture to work in the end. But it's not a difficult painting. You should manage it quite easily, and I trust you're going to enjoy it. And we'll wait for the next one. I'll be in touch soon, and before that we will be actually doing a tutorial on camel thorns and the characteristics of them, because they feature in the next picture. So I need to do that as a bit of background first, so that'll be coming up, and then that's it. So hope you enjoy this, and God bless until the next time. But goodbye.